Maybe you still remember the sound of his paws around the house. It wasn't tall. It didn't attract anyone's attention. But you knew exactly when it was him, because that sound meant you weren't alone. Now, let me ask you something that you may have never said out loud. Why, even after he was gone? Does it sometimes feel like you can still hear? As if for a second, everything went back to normal. As if he were still there. If this has ever happened to you, then pay close attention to what I'm going to tell you now. This video is not just about nostalgia. It's about understanding something that can completely change the way you see your dog and your history with him. In the next few minutes, you will notice why the connection with him was unlike any other, why he seemed to understand you without you saying anything, and why. Maybe this bond hasn't ended because there is a detail that almost no one notices. And when you realize, everything changes. Now think with me. How many times has he followed you around the house for no reason? How many times did he stare at you, silently, like he was trying to say something? And mainly, how many times have you felt like he understood you better than anyone else? If you have experienced this, then this is important. Maybe it wasn't just a dog. Maybe it never was. Short pause. And if that meeting between you, wasn't that the beginning of it all? What if it was just the moment you recognized each other? Stay with me, because at the end of this video, you can start to see this story in a way you never have before. And maybe, for the first time, the pain starts to make sense. Most people spend their entire lives believing the same version of the story, who one day entered a place, saw a dog, and chose to take him home. But maybe it wasn't like that. Perhaps at that exact moment, something else happened. Maybe he recognized you before, and that would explain why some encounters seem so strange to explain. Because not every bond starts slowly. Some start with impact, with that immediate feeling of familiarity, as if you were facing someone who had just arrived. But at the same time, it had already been part of your life for a long time. One person said they went to a shelter just to accompany a friend. She wasn't looking for a dog. I wasn't ready. I didn't want to get attached. But among so many barks, so many movements, so much agitation, there was a silent dog. He didn't jump, didn't bark. He didn't try to get attention like the others. He just stared. And it wasn't just any look. It was that kind of look that is disconcerting. Calm, fixed, deep, as if he wasn't trying to convince anyone of anything, as if he was just waiting for the right person to notice. She tried to keep walking. He looked at other dogs, talked. He took another turn. But every time I passed that space, it was still there, in the same way, looking, until she said a sentence that many dog owners have said without fully understanding her weight. It felt like he already knew me. Now think about your own story. Try going back for a moment to that first meeting. Maybe it was an adoption. Maybe it was on the street. Maybe someone put him in your arms. Maybe he just showed up at the most unlikely moment in your life. But there was something there, wasn't there? Something that didn't seem common. Something that didn't just seem like affinity, because it's one thing to like an animal. Another thing is to feel at first glance that there is a connection, as if it wasn't just matching, as if he would recognize it. Short pause, attention reset. And maybe that's why, after the meeting, everything happened so quickly inside. The trust, the attachment, the feeling of intimacy, as if he already knew your rhythm, your mood, your energy, as if his presence didn't need to be built from scratch, as if there was already a bridge between you. Now let me ask you a deep-rooted question. Why do some dogs look at us as if they are remembering and not discovering? Because the look of certain dogs doesn't seem curious. It seems spot on. There doesn't seem to be any doubt. It feels like confirmation. And this becomes even stronger when you remember something that almost every tutor has experienced. He knew when you were coming, even without hearing your car properly, even without anyone telling you, even before the gate opens. He was already at the door, waiting, as if it were no surprise, as if his return was already written inside him. Have you ever experienced this? Have you ever felt that scene so repeated that it seemed normal, but which, looking at it today, seems even mysterious? The door, the expectation, the wagging tail, that entire body saying without words, "I knew it was you." And perhaps this is the part that touches everything the most. It wasn't just the joy of seeing someone arrive. It felt like relief. It seemed certain. I seemed the reunion of someone who never stopped recognizing. So maybe the right question isn't, why did you choose him? Perhaps the right question is, why among so many possibilities was he the one who found his way to you? And if that first approach wasn't the beginning of the bond, but the continuation of something that already existed before, because when a dog comes into our lives like that, it doesn't seem random. It looks like destiny with eyes. And in the next step of this story, you'll realize why he seemed to understand even what you never managed to say. After he came into your life, some things started to happen so naturally that you didn't even realize how unusual they were. He followed you around the house, but it wasn't just about following. It was as if he was following you. You got up. He got up. You changed rooms. He would appear soon after. You stopped, and when you looked, he was already there, always there. And the curious thing is that it didn't seem necessary. It didn't feel like a lack. It felt like a choice, as if, of all possible places, his place was close to you. Now tell me, how many times have you not even noticed? But was he already watching you? That silent look, calm, deep, no rush, without demanding anything, just present. There is something about that look that almost no one can explain, because it doesn't feel like a blank stare. It looks like a look that understands. Have you ever had this feeling? If you're going through something difficult, without saying anything to anyone, and yet he completely changes his behavior? Get closer, quieter, more attentive, as if you were respecting a silence you didn't even know you were making. Now think honestly. How many people would perceive you this way? How many would feel what you were feeling without you having to explain? There's a story someone once told. She said she had a habit of locking herself in her room when she was feeling bad. No noise, no loud crying, without calling anyone. But her dog always appeared. It didn't matter how long it took. He was coming, slowly. He pushed the door, and he just lay close, no touching, no trespassing, just staying, as if to say, I know. Now for a second. Pause. Attention reset. What if this was never just behavior? What if that wasn't instinct? What if this was emotional connection on a level that we still can't quite explain? Because there are bonds that don't need language. They don't need logic. They just recognize it. And maybe that's why everything felt so intense, so fast, so true, as if he wasn't learning about you, but remembering. And here's a question that might shake you. And if he wasn't trying to understand you, but just reacting to something he already knew? Because when someone's presence brings calm, effortlessly, when someone's gaze seems to go through what you feel, when the silence between you is not uncomfortable, this is not common. This is bonding. And bonds like that, they rarely start from scratch. And maybe that's exactly what will make the next moment in this story so difficult, and at the same time, so meaningful. And then the day came that no one wanted to live. Maybe you still remember every detail, or maybe try not to remember, because just touching that memory, something tightens inside. But she's still there, the last day, the last look, the last moment he was still in the house. I still breathed in the same space as you. You were still part of the world as you knew it. And what moves the most is not just the pain of leaving. It's just that, many times, that day, he seemed different, quieter, calmer, closer, as if he wanted to stay by your side in an even deeper way, as if, without words, he was trying to deliver something. Did you feel this? Did you feel that there was something in his eyes that was unusual? As if he knew, not in a human way, not in a rational way, but in a silent way, impossible to ignore. Many people who have lost a dog carry this same memory, too long a look, a different approach, a rest in the exact place where the owner was, as if, in the midst of the pain, he was still trying to comfort those who would remain. And it breaks your heart, because even at the end, he seemed to care for you. Maybe you remember his head resting close to your leg. Maybe you remember him looking for you with his eyes. Maybe you remember the effort you made to stay strong, while inside you were already breaking. And then comes the part that no one teaches you how to face, the return home, the empty space, the place where he slept, intact, but without him, the pot, the blanket, the corner of the house that suddenly lost its meaning. And then comes that silence, not the common silence, but that silence that feels wrong, as if the house knew that someone important had left. If you've experienced this, then you know, it's not just an animal, it never was. Because what hurts is not just the absence of a dog, it is the absence of a presence that was part of your soul. And maybe that's why so many people blame themselves afterwards, for not having done more. Because I didn't realize it before. For remembering the last day and thinking, was he trying to show me something? Did he want to say goodbye? Did he know deep down? These questions remain, and they stay because that moment doesn't seem ordinary. It seems loaded with meaning, as if there was something there, greater than the pain, even if, at the time, you didn't have the strength to understand. Now, I want to ask you a very intimate question. What if that last look wasn't just sadness? What if it was also recognition? As if he were saying, in his own way, I know who you are. I know what we experienced. And it doesn't end here. Maybe that's why the departure of a dog leaves such a different mark. Because it doesn't just feel like a goodbye. It feels like the interruption of something sacred. From a routine full of small gestures that, at the time, seemed simple, but which later revealed the size of the love that existed there. The sound of pause, waiting at the door. The way he followed you around the house, the look in silence. It all comes back. All of this gains weight. All of this starts to seem like part of a language that you only really understand later. Short pause. And perhaps this is the most painful point, and deepest of all. Sometimes we only realize the spiritual size of a bond when the body is no longer here. But that doesn't mean the bond is over. It just means he changed form. And that's exactly when absence seems unbearable. The question that could transform this entire story begins to emerge. What if the last day wasn't the end? And if it was just the moment when love stopped being visible to become eternal in another way? In the next block, that's where everything changes. There is a moment in grief when the pain continues. But a question starts to grow inside. Why was this all so strong? Why, among so many animals in the world, precisely that one touched parts of you that almost no one reached? Why did his presence seem to bring peace on days that no one could alleviate? Why his departure didn't just leave us missing, but the feeling that something profoundly important happened between you? Maybe because this bond has never been small. Maybe because he was never ordinary. And perhaps now we will reach the point that changes everything. Pay attention to this sentence. Some dogs don't come into our lives just to accompany us. They come in to meet us again. Feel the weight of it. Because when this idea hits home, a lot of things start to make sense. The first look, immediate confidence. The feeling of effortless intimacy. The way he seemed to read your heart, even on days when you didn't say anything. The way it entered your routine. And, in a short time, it seemed to have belonged to your story for much longer than it was possible to explain. Maybe he wasn't there to start something from scratch. Maybe he arrived to continue something that your soul recognized before your mind understood. And that would explain why some dog bonds feel different from all others. Deeper, quieter, more true. As if there were a language between you that didn't depend on words, commands, or habit. As if there was memory in that love. Not a rational memory, but an emotional memory. Spiritual. The kind that makes the heart recognize before logic accepts. There is a micro-history that sums this up well. One person said that, in her dog's last days, she started to feel something strange. Sadness, yes. But along with the sadness, a very strong feeling of gratitude. As if, in the midst of the pain, a part of her knew that that meeting had accomplished something important. On the last day, she sat on the floor, was silent, and the dog just rested his head on her lap. No fuss, no fear, no resistance. It just stayed. And she said that, at that moment, she had a feeling that was impossible to explain. It didn't just feel like dismissal. It felt like mission completed. Now take a second and think about your own story. Were there ever moments like that? Small moments, but filled with a strange meaning? Situations in which he seemed to be there not just for company, but as an exact presence for a phase of your life? Maybe he arrived when you needed him most. Perhaps he appeared in a period of emptiness, confusion, pain, change. Maybe he gave you a routine when everything was disorganized. Maybe he gave you affection when you no longer trusted people so much. Maybe it gave you a reason to get up, walk, take care, continue. And if so, then it's worth facing a profound question. And if he didn't come into your life by coincidence, but for purpose? Pause. Attention reset. Because when a bond heals, welcomes, accompanies, and transforms, it stops seeming accidental. It starts to feel necessary. And that doesn't lessen the pain of loss, but it gives it a new meaning. Pain stops being just suffering for something that has ended. It also becomes proof that something very real happened. Very true. Very rare. And here is the most important point of this block. Maybe his mission was never to stay forever the way you wanted. Maybe his mission was to find you, mark you, remind you of a form of love that the world almost made you forget. A love without charge, no mask, no interest, a love that understands. What a weight. Which remains. And that's why the departure of a faithful dog touches such a deep layer of the soul. Because it's not just the loss of a routine. It's the feeling that someone who knew exactly who you were has left your field of vision. But that doesn't mean it disappeared from the bond. On the contrary, sometimes this is precisely where the bond reveals its deepest part. When the body is gone, and the love continues, when the physical presence ends, and the connection remains alive within everything he left in you. Maybe that's why certain memories don't weaken. The sound of pause, waiting at the door, the silent look, the corner of the house where he slept. All of this continues to pulse because they weren't just habits. They were signs of a love that touched something eternal. And perhaps the truth is this. Some dogs don't pass through our lives like visitors. They arrive as if they recognize. They remain like someone who protects. And they leave, leaving a mark that never seems to end. Because deep down, it isn't. It's just the moment when love can no longer be touched. But it begins to be felt in an even deeper way. And in the next block, this is exactly what starts to appear in the small signs that almost no one notices. After he leaves, most people think all that's left are memories, photos, objects, broken routines, silences. But anyone who has had a very deep bond with a dog knows that, sometimes, it doesn't stop there. Because there are absences that do not behave like a complete absence. They leave traces, sensations, small moments that seem too quick to explain, but too strong to ignore. Maybe this has already happened to you. You passed a room in the house, and for a second, you automatically looked at the place where he used to be. Not because I wanted to, but because some part of you felt like he could still be there. Maybe it was when I woke up. Maybe when you get home. Maybe at that exact time when he always showed up. And for a moment, it was as if your body remembered before your mind did, as if the connection was still alive on some level. Many people live this in silence because they are afraid of seeming exaggerated. But it is not an exaggeration to feel the continuation of a bond that was true. It's human, it's emotional, and for many people, it is also spiritual. Some report that they still feel his presence in moments of pain, precisely on the most difficult days. On days when your chest feels tight, your homesickness is heavy, the house seems too big. As if somehow that love still finds a way to reach out when you need it most. Not like before, not in a visible way, but in a subtle way, delicate, almost impossible to put into words. And maybe that's why certain details move so much. The place where he slept, the blanket, the corner of the room, the door where he waited for you to arrive. These places are no longer just spaces in the house. They became points of living memory. They saw places where the heart still recognizes presence. Now I want to ask you a very honest question. Have you ever felt that, even though he was no longer there physically, was he somehow still there when you needed him most? If you felt this, then you know it's not just any memory. It's different, because memory usually comes from the mind, but that, sometimes, comes from the whole body. It comes as a shiver, how to squeeze, like sudden peace, like a longing that, for a few seconds, doesn't hurt, welcomes. Short pause. And perhaps this is one of the most profound signs of all, when pain, for a moment, mixes with comfort. When you think about him, and along with the sadness, there's a feeling of love that is still alive. It's not because you overcame it. It is because certain bonds do not end in matter. They keep echoing. They continue to find ways to exist within the memory, affection, and emotional presence they left behind. There is a micro-history that translates this very well. One person said that, weeks after the dog left, they were having a particularly difficult day. The house was silent. She sat on the floor, close to where he used to sleep, and began to cry. And at that moment, without knowing why, the pain changed. It didn't go away, but it changed. She said she felt a sudden calm, as if she wasn't alone in that pain, as if that bond, which previously came in the form of steps, looks, and company, now came in the form of support. This doesn't prove anything to anyone looking in from the outside, but for those who feel it, it says a lot, because not everything that is real needs to be visible. Some of the deepest things we experience, we can only feel. And with this kind of love, it can also be like that. Maybe the signs aren't in major events. Maybe they are precisely in what is small, in the habit of still talking to him in thought, in the reflex to look for your face when something good happens, in the feeling that he would be part of that moment, under the impression that love was not interrupted, it just changed language. And this is what almost no one realizes. Sometimes the continuity of a bond does not show itself strongly. It shows itself delicately, with subtlety, with that silent feeling that the love that existed there was not lost. It just stopped being visible. So, when someone says they still feel the dog nearby, maybe I'm not talking about fantasy. Maybe he's talking about emotional loyalty, the mark that pure love leaves when it truly crosses our lives, And I want to open an important space here, because this is one of those moments that create real community. If something similar has ever happened to you, if you have ever felt this subtle presence, if you've ever looked at his place and for a second had the feeling that the bond continues, write in the comments, "I felt it." Because when you write this, you're not just telling your story. It's showing other people that they are not alone. It is validating a pain that many people carry in silence. It's transforming longing into belonging. And perhaps that is exactly what these bonds do until after the match. They continue to unite. They continue to heal. They continue to remind those who stayed that the love they experienced was too real to fit into the past. And in the next block, it is precisely this truth that will gain even greater meaning. Because maybe he didn't just pass through your life. Maybe, in some way, he still walks with you. Now come back with me to that first image, the sound of paws around the house. At the beginning of this video, this memory appeared as pain, like absence, like that void that remained when everything fell silent. But now, maybe she can be seen in another way. Because perhaps what hurts most isn't just the lack of sound. Maybe it's the fact that it meant presence, careful, company, faithful love. And when a love like that enters our life, it doesn't disappear out of nowhere. It changes shape. Maybe that's why certain memories remain so vivid. Not because you are stuck in the past, but because the bond still exists within you. In the way you remember, in the way you feel, in the way you still talk about him, even in silence. Because there are presences that leave the body, but they don't leave the path. And maybe that's exactly what your heart tries to tell you every time the longing comes back with a vengeance. This was not small. This was not common. This was no coincidence. Your dog knew it was you. I knew it at first glance. I knew when I was waiting for you at the door. I knew when I followed you around the house without needing a reason. I knew when I leaned on you on difficult days. And maybe, even in the last look, he still knew. Maybe that was why everything between you seemed so intense, so familiar, so impossible to replace. Because some encounters don't happen just to bring joy for a while. Some encounters happen to mark the soul. And when they leave an impression on the soul, they don't end in the usual way. They remain in memory. They continue to miss us. They remain in love. And sometimes they still have that difficult-to-explain feeling that, on some level, he is still close. Not the way you would like, not the way the eyes want to see, but the way the heart still recognizes. Short pause, final attention reset. So when the silence in the house seems too heavy, remember this. Maybe it's not just empty. Maybe he's also an echo. Echo of a love so true that it still passes through the days. Echo of a bond that didn't just fit in the time you were together. Echo of something that continues, even without making a sound. And perhaps the most beautiful truth is this. He didn't pass through your life. He found you. It fulfilled something in you. He left part of it in his wake. And he took part of you with him. If this message spoke to your story, write it here in the comments. He found me. And if deep down in your soul you feel that this bond continues in some way, also write, "We will see you again." Because when you write this, you're not just commenting. You are turning pain into a statement, longing in living love, and I fight in hope. Keep this truth with you today. Some connections don't end when physical presence ends. They just stop being seen to begin to be felt in a deeper way. And perhaps even now, in a silent way, invisible, but full of love, he is still walking with you.